Dr. Nasr, earlier, Dr. Guidardoni made a reference to the scientific interpretation of the Qur'an and was critical of it. But I think maybe the audience would benefit maybe from a few more minutes of discussion about what is this thing called the scientific, tafsir al-ilmi, the scientific interpretation of the Qur'an, because the Qur'an, as everyone knows, is replete with references to the world of nature. The Qur'an swears many oaths by different parts of the world of nature, and some commentators really went very far in trying to make modern science and the Qur'an somehow coincide or have a very particular relationship. I was wondering if you could just say something about the history of that and its ramifications.
I'm glad you brought this issue up, because this issue is really an intellectual weakness and even evil that still exists in the Islamic world in certain quarters. It began in the 1890s in Egypt, and a person who was professionally a doctor called Al-Iskandarani wrote a tafsir al-Quran based on scientific interpretation of verses of the Quran which pertain to the science of that time. At that time already, since the science was coming from the West, since the West was powerful, and with the military machine was destroying the Islamic forces wherever it went, power usually brings with it obedience and respect, unfortunately. A lot of Muslims in their heart had respect for modern science without even knowing what it was. The beginners already in the 1890s, in India a bit earlier. Anyway, India had nothing to do with this particular issue. After Al-Iskandarani's work, a number of apologists, you might say, in Syria, other places, then in India itself, and in Iran in the 1830s and 40s, began to write commentaries defending Islam on the basis that the verses of the Quran accorded with scientific theories or truths. Now, this is something of a suicide, because people who know science know that the results of modern science change all the time. If you read Al-Iskandarani now, it sounds absurd, because Newtonian physics is no longer accepted. Even said that Seyyed Nursi, the famous Turkish commentator on the Quran, his early treatises on the Nursi treatises, he would defend of Newtonian physics as a kind of proof of the reality of Islam. And then he realized it was stupid. He said, I'm a new Nursi. This was very prevalent. And also the idea of taking pride in the fact that Islam developed science. And it goes, the logic, if you reduce to cynicism, would be the following. The West is great. The West says that science is great. Therefore, science is great. Islam produced science, therefore Islam is great. So Allah Akbar is reduced to Al-Gharb Al-Akbar. It's the West that is great, not Allah. That's really the gist of the whole argument. And it's very dangerous, still goes on. In my own country, Iran, if somebody invents some gadget, I was many of the president of Iran's leading university in sciences, which is now called Sharif University. The most brilliant young Muslim scientists and engineers were there, unbelievable. Half of them are now in Stanford and MIT. If someone invents a machine, you know, not only does it get an award, it's on television, but there's a great contribution to Islam. Well, it's not a great contribution to Islam at all. The machine could cause a lot of harm later on. But the idea of taking pride in that we're doing what the West thinks to be important well, because the West is important, because we have an inferiority complex toward the West. Let's sit down and take a mirror of our face and realize it. We have to overcome the inferiority complex. And we have some brilliant young Muslim minds. I have a lot of hope in them. But it's important that they be weaned away from this drug that they have been given without their knowing it in their education, and try to stand independently on their own feet and be able to be critical of not only something that Western science might say wrong or does wrong, but also of the Islamic interpretation of that. Whereas you are a young Muslim scholar, you know very well the reverse is taking place in this country. We have a lot of young Muslim scholars who have gone to the field of Islamic studies, and they make the Western interpretation of things Islamic, but with an Islamic name, the way of getting ahead in the academic world, which is a very, very dangerous thing. But the West, there's the motto of medieval West, which I love, that says, "Winked omnia veritas." إذا جاء الحق وذاق الباطل. That's that verse of the Quran. The truth shall always triumph, inshallah.
Dr.